Hi, David Taylor, or Mr Pelargonium as people like to call me. It's the end of summer and autumn's on the way, and there are jobs aplenty that we got to do at this time of year. So let's have a look at what we got to do. Hello there. Well, it's good to see you again. It's been about a month actually since I've made a video. I mean, not a great deal goes on during August. Plants are sort of growing away, and you know, there's good displays to be had around the greenhouse, and certainly outside. It's been a good summer. I think we've had generally quite sort of one extreme weather in the UK. We've had very wet weather one minute and very hot sunny weather the next, so it's been a bit of a right mixture, but it has kept everything looking relatively fresh outside. Of course, you've had to keep the deadheading going, which keeps the plants looking quite fresh, but with a bit of rain on them does give them a bit of damage, so you do have to keep your deadheading up. But the gardens looked pretty decent, to be quite honest, during the summer, so I've been relatively happy with the summer we've had. Now, as we move into the autumn period, certainly with your greenhouse plants and any plants outside, pelargoniums that you're going to be thinking about bringing into the greenhouse to overwinter, there are certain things that you're going to have to do to ensure that you get them through the winter without too many problems, and we'll be having a look at some of those jobs that you can do today. Now, this very late summer period, certainly in the greenhouse, when the sun is just beginning to lose its intensity, means that you can often get some really good displays going on. And I've got one or two plants. I mean, here's a dwarf, for instance. This is bold cherub, which always does well for me in the shows. And I mean, this has come on. I've just let this grow on to flower. I mean, this is looking pretty decent. I mean, I'd be relatively happy with this in a show. It's a little bit empty around the middle, but I'm not bothered about that at this time of year. It's just they put on a really good display during the late summer sort of period. But this now will need cutting back. It'll just need a bit of a shape. Now, with zonals, I don't actually do a great deal to them. I give them a bit of a shaping. But the main thing I do to zonals in the autumn period to get them through the winter is do a lot of leaf stripping. This will allow the air to get round the stems to avoid botrytis. Zonals are very prone to getting botrytis, which is a fungal disease, around the stems, and you know, you want to try and avoid that. So what I will probably do to save this plant and all of my zonals during this month of September is certainly strip all the blooms off. Do a little bit of shaping. I don't do a great deal of stopping to my zonal plants. If I've got a particularly long stem that's making the plant go out of shape, I will stop it back to equal the others. But in general, the biggest job that I do is just strip the leaves back to enable the plant to get through the winter without too many problems with botrytis. Because here in the UK, we get, you know, a lot of damp weather during the autumn and winter, and that's the key problem with inviting botrytis onto the zonal stems, which botrytis particularly like. So that'll be what I've been that will be what I will be doing, particularly this month to my zonal plants. Now, while we're talking about zonals, a plant that I have just let grow through, this was a plant that I was given. Right, now this is a plant called Annie Grace, and it was it's one of the last zonals that Ken Diamond ever bred. Of course, he was very famous for his angel varieties, with most of them being prefixed with Quantock. But he also did one or two zonals, and this single variety, Annie Grace, has got an absolutely stunning bloom. I've actually never seen the bloom on it before. I've been given a small plant of it, which I've grown on and I've never let it flower because I wanted to get a relatively good shape to it, because I'll use this in the shows next year. And it's just begun to flower, and it really is quite stunning. It's a sort of peach, mottled peach on a sort of pale creamy background. This is a real beaut. I don't think it's ever been released yet. I know whether Fibrex have got it, but this is a really nice plant. And what I particularly like, as with all zonals that have got is a good zone. I do like a good zone on a zonal plant. It's got a slight ovaling shape, so this is a classic example, one that I will just cut back at the side to make it round, strip its leaves down in order to get it through the winter. Now, talking of show plants, it was interesting because at the annual show this year, I spoke obviously to a good number of growers, and I was interested to see how many of the sort of top exhibitors seemingly put their plants in their final pot, to me, relatively late. It is sort of in the autumn or over into the winter even. But I don't do that. I tend to get mine certainly at their latest in this month. They will be potted up, and I would say probably a good third of my show plants, or maybe even half actually, are already in their final pots. I have been potting up in this last month. Certainly all of these sort of seedling plants that are for one's earmarked for maybe the show, I've already got them in a 4.5 inch pot as a dwarf, and they won't be touched again. They will be left in there until the exhibition season next year. But I was quite interested how many of the country's leading exhibitors don't seem to get their pot up their plants into their final pot until relatively late. That does surprise me, because to a certain extent I do very little during the winter, and certainly potting up plants in the winter can be a challenge, because you have to be so careful with how you then water them, because you'll have a sort of root ball that'll have new compost, but of course they're not growing very much, which is why I like to get mine into their final pots in August and September, so that there's still a bit of warmth for the roots to really get out into the pots, and also grow right through the winter and be very tight by the time the shows come next year. Now, talking of plants and cutting back, one thing I have done is that I've done a really good number of my Regals. Now, you may remember I cut my Regals back after the shows. You may remember, I think I'd show some videos on that. You can probably see one of them up here. I'll point it out to you. And that they've been potted up now into their sort of final pots, really. This one was done sort of back in late June. So this is one of my new ones, actually. So that was potted down and then repotted back up. This is in sort of a final pot stage now already. As I've already said, I like to get my stuff into their final pots. But they grew through. During August, they became very big again, and now they've been cut back already for the winter. So they've been stripped. And I've got a bit of a video here in the background, which I'll just talk through. I took this about a couple of weeks ago when I was cutting back one of my plants, and I thought I'd just show you how I go about sort of stripping back. Now, one of the key things, as always with cutting plants back, is make sure they're very much on the dry side before you really go attacking them, because then you do not get the bleeding stems, which is vital to do. I mean, you can see sort of in this case, I'm really sort of just hacking back quite deep, particularly if you need to reshape. You can really hack down deep, because the plants are going to grow really, really strongly during the autumn and winter period. That's the good thing about the Regals. They really do put on a lot of growth over the cooler months. And that's one of the problems that people have that live in warmer climates. They can't sort of get that sort of control of the Regals, which we can say in the UK and obviously in many parts of Europe, particularly Northern Europe, where we get a good temperate winter. because it makes them grow, but it makes them sort of know that there's a sort of cooler sort of feel to the weather. And then back when you get to the late spring and early summer, when it really does warm up, you get that massive burst of colour that you can get on a very well trained plant. And that's the benefits of growing Regals in a temperate climate. And so, yeah, you can see here, I mean, this one's sort of been cropped back now. I've sped this through a little bit. And so that's more or less how it's ended. And I've probably got that one here. I can't quite remember what particular plant it was now, but that was looking pretty good in the end. It's cut back quite hard, as I've done with all my Regals here. I mean, the other problem is, of course, is that I have got very limited space now. So I'm going to be positioning plants under benches and all that sort of thing through the winter. There is a bit of light that gets through, particularly at the front end of the greenhouse. So, you know, that will be where they will be sat. So yeah, so there we are. You know, that's the Regals. You know, they will go. This end of the greenhouse does get a bit of light sort of through underneath, even during the sort of, you know, the quieter winter period. And that's where a lot of Regals will go. It'll be very cool under there, and they'll love that. They'll really enjoy being in that, and it'll grow really quite quickly. As I've mentioned with your Zonals, I just cut them back a bit and strip them again, making sure they're on the dry side before you do it. And the main thing to remember is, once your plants are cut back, when you do start watering them again, you've got to, you know, be very sort of gentle with the amount that you give them. Don't go over watering them, which can be a classic, because once they become big, you would have been watering them, you know, relatively sort of, you know, continuously. So ensure that you're only giving them a little bit of water to start with once they begin growing again. And of course, as the days get cooler and shorter anyway, you won't need to be giving them so much. I'm still watering about twice a week with everything. But in general, that should slow down relatively soon. I mean, one of the problems that we do get in the UK, of course, September can be a very unpredictable month. Some years it can be very hot and sunny, other years it can be very cool and wet. It's certainly cooled down in the last sort of few days, but at the moment, you know, it is still quite bright and quite sunny, so the temperature is still getting, you know, quite, you know, up to sort of the mid-20s in here during the day. Right, now the other thing we're going to have to consider is our greenhouse shading. I use the whitewash shading, which I find very effective. It keeps the glasshouse really cool, and it keeps the glass cold as well. And I will probably wait another couple of weeks. I mean, one of the problems with doing it too early, as I explained earlier, the problem in September, we never quite know what the weather's going to be doing. So I will probably wait a couple of weeks, round about the equinox period time, round about the 21st of the month, before I brush it off with a hose. That will clear that down. It comes off relatively easily. If you're in a shady position, if your glasshouse is in a shady position, I would probably think about doing it now, because you want as much light as possible to be getting to your plants in order for them to grow healthily on through into the autumn. So I will probably, though, in my relatively open position here, wait another couple of weeks before I brush mine off. But that is something that we will need to be doing this month. Now, the other thing I have been doing, the Regal cuttings that we took about a month or so ago, a lot of these have rooted now, and I have begun the process of potting them on. I strangely did a few yesterday, so there's an example of one of them. There's a good example of a number of the new varieties that I've grown and have kept. I'll probably let Fibrex have a number of them next spring, and they'll be able to trial them over however many years they wish to do. The other thing that I've done is with my standard. This is the standards that have been potted up. I've potted them up. Now, in exhibition terms, they can go up to, I think it's either an 8 or a 10-inch pot for a standard. I can't quite remember now, but I potted these into a 7 because they are dwarfs and they are not going to, I don't want them to get huge, very huge, but they are only a year old anyway, so, but I do want them to put on quite a bit of weight. Now again, I've done a little bit of an overlap video on this, so I'll show you that now. Now potting them on, I did a little bit of stopping to give them a little bit of shape a couple of days before I did the potting on, just to give them a little bit of a stop. The main thing was I just want to gain a little bit of shape to them. Now the interesting thing is, of course, is that with a standard, perhaps unlike some exhibition plants, you want to keep the base of the sort of standard growth, if you like, quite high in the pot, because you want to keep as much of that main stem as possible. So you're not going to be burying them. You need to keep the compost level the same. So if you're using a bigger pot, as in this case, you're going to be putting a fair bit of compost in the base of the new pot, and then sitting that on top and leveling it off. That's not easy to say. Just to give the stem all of its all of that growth that you've trained into it. You don't want to be burying that down because you want that reveal of the stem. And so there we are. I untied it initially. I've used a slightly bigger stick. This is about I don't know, I would say it's 6 or 7 millimeters in diameter, this stick. Stronger stick, certainly enough to hold a dwarf standard. You don't need a really big strong stick, say as in a much taller standard, which is going to have to hold a lot of weight. I mean, in this case, I would hope that probably in 2, 3 or 4 years, the actual weight of the stem will be able to hold itself up. But in this case, it's just a question of stripping off the string that's held it all together and kept the stem nice and straight, which by now we hope has developed into a good straight stem, and just potting it through. Now, the main thing is you just sort of seat that new stick through into the gap that's been left by the stick you've taken out. That won't then damage too much root. We're just expanding the hole slightly. Hold the stem while you're pushing the new stick down through, because of course you've got about 2, 3, maybe 4 inches of new compost just to push it down through into. And you don't need actually to tie on a lot. Now the main job of straightening the stem has been done, as you can see by the amount of string that we actually cut off initially. So I'm only putting one piece of string to hold it together at the top. And there we are. I give them a good water in a saucer, and yeah, ready to go. And so yeah, here they are. Is the other one. This is the other rascal as well. This one has got a straighter stem, there's no doubting that, but the growth is slightly over to one side, so I have put one nick in there to stop it. We got some young stems to grow out this side yet, so I will train those. And I did these about a week or so ago, and they're probably ready for another water now. So yeah, just getting a bit dry. So so they're done. So they're ready to. But again, they'll be stripped back a bit. Now the thing with the standard, they got a lot of air underneath them, so they are not so susceptible to botrytis standards. So, you know, you don't need to maybe strip down as much as usual, but these are, of course, stellas. And one of the issues with stellas, particularly in the springs, they get a lot of red leaves. So, and in fact, with a little bit of the stress that we've had and that they've had, started to get 1 or 2 little red-edged leaves already. So they'll be stripped to get you through the winter, but it's only a little bit of a sign of stress, nothing too much to worry about.